This is Kat,
And this is Saskia,
and this is Note to Self.
your weekly dose of everything that's just simply too long to text. So, hello, Note to Self listeners. Things are a little different today. It is a solo episode with your host, Saskia, which feels weird to be looking at the camera and not at Kat. I really miss her. She is on vacation in Europe, living her best life. We gave her the week off and we'll be back next week recording. But really today, what I wanted to dive into is an update on fair play, because I know the last time I brought it up, I got so many messages from people reaching out saying that they really wanted to start it and were interested in it. So I kind of wanted to do a little deep dive into what I've been reading and kind of where Jeffrey and I are at in the process. So before we left for Europe, we kind of just started touching on the book and we're listening to it. Went to Europe, kind of fell off. So since we've been back, I actually got the book, and I realized last time I never said what it actually was. So it's called Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. You can see it here if you were listening or if you were watching the podcast. So we have continued reading through it. I'm like a few chapters before I'm finished with it. But there's like really a few ways you can do this, because ultimately the whole purpose of this book is to play this card game. So I also got the card game, which is this deck, and this is actually how you divide all the tasks. So for those who hadn't listened to the previous episode when I mentioned this, Fair Play is by a woman called Eve Rodsky. She is a lawyer and an organizational psychologist. And essentially, TLDR, she quit her job when she had kids. They had to move for her husband's work. And it was maybe like 4 years into her not working. I think she had 2 kids. And she got a text from her husband asking where the blueberries were. And the message just sent her. It really, I think, was just the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And she had this moment of realization where she's like, what am I doing? Like, I'm in charge of every single element of our life in terms of the household that they were running or that she was running. And she started to think through, how can I make all this invisible work that I do visible to my husband? And she started to work with her friends, and they created a spreadsheet called the Should I Do list and put all these items in it. And from there, she took that and did an actual study with different couples to learn who really is holding the majority of the tasks. And the study showed that it was primarily women in these scenarios. And I think from there, she started to think, like, why do we not run our relationships like we run a business, where we're delegating different tasks? Because any successful business is not being managed or run by a single person. So I think what's really interesting is this analogy. I feel the reason it has resonated, and there's so many couples that are finding this to be extremely successful, is because of the analogy of running your relationship like a corporation. And it may not be like the funnest analogy, but I think it resonates specifically. I think it does resonate with men because it's very prescriptive. And at least I've found in my experience with like a lot of my guy friends or like my partner, like they like you to be very prescriptive. So I noticed like when Jeffrey and I were reading it together, it really like he started to really get it. So I was thinking through though, like some people, you may not want to read the book, right? Maybe you just are like, I'm done. I just want to play the card game. So I feel like there's a few ways you can kind of do it. Before I started to record this, I was kind of thinking through it. In the book, it's written like it's written for the woman in a way, but it doesn't have to be a woman, right? Like I know people who like the man is the person in the relationship who is doing, all of these tasks or whatever, the situation is. Whoever is the person who's holding the task, let's just say the person. So it's written for their perspective and it gives you steps. So like you could read it solo if you're not comfortable confronting your partner about this. And it actually gives you steps on how exactly to bring this up with them. And I think that that's really helpful because it talks about like the type of dialogue that you can use. I really do suggest reading it together if your partner's open to it, because I think I've found that it really gave Jeffrey a lot of context when he's been reading it with me. There's so many examples of things and different analogies. And I felt like we were a little bit both, like we were both bought in from the start, which was helpful. And I think what was helpful is the way I even positioned it is when we started, like I definitely was getting massively triggered because the context is intense because you're reading it and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is everything that I'm doing. And you feel very seen, which is empowering, but also can be a bit overwhelming, I found. Even having the conversation with friends, I've seen them like be like, oh my gosh, that's how I feel. And something that I think is helpful, as I said to Jeffrey, as I was saying, that this isn't like, an attack on you as a human being or who you are and your personality. It's really just we're all products of the society we live in. So I kind of was like, you should be proud of yourself for the fact that you want to read this. And I think any couple or individual that's interested in this type of stuff, it's like you wanting to make a change for your relationship. And I just think that's, something to be proud of. It seemed to resonate. So just something I want to share. And look, the third way is just dive in and play the cards. So you can just get these separately and you don't even need the game. This is the deck, the book. You just get the deck. And there is like some basic instructions in there. And I think she has even some online resources that you can print out to help you. I am someone that loves steps and needs to follow all the steps. So must read the book. I must read it every single page, even the ones not relevant, because there's a lot of cards. I would say I think she says like 40 of the cards are kid-related cards. So if you have a family with children, obviously not relevant to me. So some of that, she says if you don't have kids, you just take those cards out because they're not, as they would say, they're not in play right now. But it was fascinating even still to just read, everything that goes into having kids, man. Shout out to our listeners who have kids. It really does seem so intense. It's always fun. I just step in as the fun little friend of my friends who have kids or family members who have kids. You just step in, hang out, and then you step out. Can't complain about that. But I was thinking what might be helpful is I can share some key takeaways I've had so far because I'm up to I've read through all the steps of how to play the game. And I think the biggest takeaway is this thing called CPE. And CPE stands for conception, planning, and execution. So an analogy I like is, or an example, is the trash example. So, you are asking your partner to take out the trash. And I was speaking to a friend about this. And it's like, taking the trash out, but like you're doing out the bag, putting it by the door. So all they're doing is executing and taking it out, but they're not thinking, oh, the trash needs to go out. So they're not doing the conception, they're not doing the planning, and they're executing, but then oftentimes the trash bag isn't even being replaced. So it's this idea that every one of there's 100 cards. Every one of the cards, you have to sit when you're dividing them and make clear what is required for each card. So what is it's like the minimum you need to do for that card to be completed, I guess. I'm like, is it like work terms? Like, what are the deliverables? I don't know. I miss Kat. I need someone to riff with. But no, so conception, planning, execution. Every card will have those, and studies that they did showed that the majority of the conception and planning was held again by the person who was in charge of like all these household chores, and the execution was usually the other person, and on only a few cards. So it was that's like the mental burden that I think I'm even struggling with, right? So I think that was a big one. Something else I thought was super interesting, because I'm always like, I want things to be equal. And something she said was like, it's not always going to be equal. Because someone was asking what's fair, like what is fair in this? And they said like what is fair isn't always equal. And I thought that was really interesting, because the minimum is that not one person can hold all the cards, but also like sometimes someone may be holding more cards than the other, or I guess that's just with life generally. Like sometimes you have more bandwidth than the other person. So that was something I thought about, that I wasn't expecting it to be totally equal, but it's like maybe you take even baby steps where it's just taking turns slowly dividing these cards. And I think the other thing that was a part of this is if, every card needs to be taken, other than if, you don't have kids, put those cards out of your deck. But every card needs to be taken. And if you can't make a decision on a card on who wants to take it, you flip a coin. And also what's interesting is like, you can pick what cards you like. Like I love to cook, so I would probably want to pick that card. So there's certain things that you may love doing and you want to hold that card as something that you enjoy doing. So I think in my head, I thought it was like, you just like deal the cards and that's what it is. But it's much more of a joint exercise of discussing which cards you want, which ones maybe you don't want, and then how do you divide it? I mean, you're never going to have all the cards you want. So I guess that's just part of it. The other thing that I thought was interesting was around like redealing the deck, because this happens pretty often and it's kind of set up to you. I think Jeffrey and I, we're about to go away again, so we probably won't be dealing the deck until we're back. But I think maybe we'd start with like a week, see how we go, and then check in after a week, and then maybe we redeal. Some cards you're apparently redealing daily. It's not even like we're sitting down and redealing. It's just sometimes, tasks are changing, something comes up, you have to ask your partner to take the other card. So I thought that was interesting. And then also like there's even cards for kind of like they're called wild cards for things that happen, maybe like life-changing things that you might need to deal with, and then your partner has to take on more of the cards. So like that's an opportunity of where you would redeal, which I think is really interesting because those are the moments that can be the most stressful, and having this system already in place, I think can help mitigate a lot of that additional stress. So those were some of the key takeaways that I would say if you are just going to straight away play the game, those are the important factors to think about. And like we can look at it now because I have it here and I think it's important to kind of show what it looks like. So yeah, you have like all these cards in here, right? You pull them out and then they have, I think there's the instructions in there as well. So you can see like each one, I guess this is a kid's one, school transitions. Don't have kids. I assume maybe they are going from high school to primary school. I have no idea. Parents, you tell me. Oh my God, I'm getting all the kid ones. Did I just pick up every single kid ones? Yeah, look, I guess partner coach, home furnishings, cleaning. We know this one here. There's some home ones. Dishes, dry cleaning, garbage, groceries. You get the gist. So each of these cards, though, I think when you, the one thing that is good about the book is they have these little markers on them, which is a coffee cup if it's daily things you have to do. And then they're divided into like home, caregiving, self-care, whatever it is. So I think some of those other ones that I was a bit uncertain of, they're in the different categories. But the book does give explanations for each card, which is really helpful. So you can cross-reference. And also I think you can print it out on her website because I remember her saying in the book you can get it on the website too. But I mean, I think it's good to have both, right? Because you just have it to reference. Now, some pushback I've heard around this, because maybe it's not even pushback, it's just like different concepts that I think have even arisen with me and then like other people I've spoken to around this whole process, right? Because it does seem kind of daunting, right? And I do think that I find these types of very clear steps get me excited for something, but I think other people, it might deter them, right? So that's why I'm like, maybe you just want to play the cards straight away. But the big thing that was coming up for me, and I think so often what I was like doing before I kind of started to read about this stuff was I would always just be like, oh, it's just easier for me to do it rather than like tell Jeffrey how to do it or teach him how to do it. And I remembered something that my old manager told me, who's a really good friend of mine. And I used to be like that at work because I'd be like, oh, it's just easier for me to do it. Like I couldn't be bothered to like teach my contractor, whoever I was managing, how to do it. And she was just like, I remember she said to me, like, you'll never be able to get things off your plate or let go or even grow in your career if you can't. And obviously that's like a very, work-related example, but it's the same thing. And I think it's almost like you're a product of your own oppression if you just continue doing it, rather than taking the time to teach. And when I started to think about that, then I was like, well, why do I have to teach? And I think it was something that the therapist that Jeffrey and I both go to together, was she even said to me, it's almost like using these skills that you learned at work, like these managerial skills or your influence or whatever, to like help direct your partner. And it's like, because it isn't like really helping Jeffrey in the long run by me just doing it, and also by me if I just get angry, right? So I think I started to think of it like, I don't want to be like his mother, but I guess it's more like a joint exercise and learning from each other in a way. So that's something that I'm still trying to work through, but I feel like it's helpful when I thought about it in the work context, where I'm like, oh, I mean, that's how I helped people that I worked with, was having to teach, and people have had to do that for me too. And then I started to think about, and they also say this in the book, because this comes up a lot, is around this like being able to let go and taking a moment to teach, because it's long-term success for short-term pain. So she shared this really interesting data point from the Huffington Post, where apparently they asked divorced women what they wish they had done differently in their marriages. And many said, I wish I would have asked her help when I needed it. And I thought that that was pretty intense, because I just feel like this whole thing, I'm so amped up on it now, clearly, but is so a reason why so many relationships fall apart, because you're just fighting about this shit all the time. And I just think it's just really amazing that this whole thing exists. But I think that is such a true point of just asking for help. And then also I think sometimes it's like being scared to ask for help, right? And so often, I mean, I at least know that I'm just so frustrated that instead of having direct communication, I have like divisive communication, which was something else they spoke about, was like, there was a relationship therapist that the author spoke to who said a lot of the conversations around these topics are met with divisive communication rather than direct. And another like major reason why relationships fail. And I think it's just so easy to fall into that when you're so exhausted and tired, right? And you're having to like do it all. Something else that was interesting that another friend said to me was like, just this like isn't very sexy. And like, it was so interesting because I hadn't thought about that. And then I was thinking, yeah, I mean, you're right. Like it's just so direct and prescriptive, and you kind of feel like you're at work, right? And I was reflecting on that too. And we spoke about it, and I said to her, I do feel like elements of relationships aren't always going to be sexy though. And like by doing this, you're creating space for more sexiness in your relationship, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's cards for like date nights in there, right? I know like Jeffrey and I recently moved in together, maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago. And it's so easy to fall into the roommate trap, especially when I've been living by myself. I'm just in my little routine, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, we need to dedicate time to go out to dinner, go to a movie, go for a walk, anything that's just not us just living together. And, when you're, again, having to do everything for your household and your life and organizing all your travel, all that stuff, it's hard to feel like you want to make space for that. And part of me thinks that, again, that is tied into this whole topic. So I really do feel like that is definitely, a major part of this whole idea. And so I kind of said to her is, the sexiness in a way is coming from, will come from the work that you're doing here. And then the last thing that I started to think about was like, how can I trust that the tasks will be completed? I'm still struggling with that one. So I don't know. I feel the book just always says it's just you have to let go and just trust that your partner is going to get there. And maybe sometimes they'll fail, just like, you do at work, I guess. And just having patience, and ultimately just if you're turning up and working on it together, you just hope that will continue to change. So stay tuned for that last element, because we will see what will happen. But yeah, I mean, I hope that this is helpful for people. I was trying to think about if doing a solo episode Obviously, we're doing like a shorter one this time because not having Kat, I didn't want you guys to have to listen to me gab on for ages. But I was trying to think about what could be helpful to talk about and something that I'm passionate about and diving into. And I really was astonished, and maybe not even astonished, but then also not surprised as well. It's weird because they're two completely opposite feelings, but by the amount of people who reached out and people I hadn't like spoken to in years who were like, oh, I'm feeling this. Like I need to talk about this with my partner. And I do feel like there's this collective awakening happening. And I'll speak at it from the female perspective. Is the perspective I have is like, I feel so many of my female friends are waking up and feeling like they want to change what is like this whole how we've been living in a way. And again, we're all products of this society we live in. It hasn't benefited us, or it hasn't benefited our partners either. And I think a big thing you see as well with this is when the one person is holding all the cards, it does affect your physical relationship as well. Because if you're tired all the time, the last thing you want to do is have sex, at least in my experience. And that's like a whole other topic I could dive into, which I think would be would be interesting to dive into with Kat. But it's something, again, I've heard a lot of women talk about is they're so tired all the time. So it's not something that they want to do. So to my male listeners who may be experiencing this clicking, Kat hates when I do the little clicky thing, but I do think that this ties into so many different elements of your relationship. So I just find there's so much power into doing this. So the next step will be dividing these cards. Oh my God, looking at the pile is actually overwhelming. There's so many cards. I will update you though. The next few episodes, Kat and I will be catching up. But when we are back from our Burning Man adventure, wish me luck in the desert, getting slightly nervous about that, waking up in sweats over Burning Man. But I'll update on how things are going with dividing all the tasks and seeing how it's working. Because no doubt it's going to be bumpy, but it's fun to try something new, right? And I think it'll be beneficial to both of us in the long run. So this is our little episode with me today. I hope that this was interesting and people found it helpful. And I will see you guys next week with Catherine. I keep calling her Catherine. She's going to find this episode so weird. Can't wait to have her back. Solo episodes are hard, guys. I don't know if I can talk anymore, so we're out.